Share audio. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next meeting. Um, it's still me, Tor, holding these meetings. And I was just saying that this is sort of where I hope to be at the end of our the next one or two meetings. And I'm just showing you what I'm going for so that way when I work my way through it, you guys have a better vision of like, oh, that's what's going on. Um, I could have made like a full design document and like said, "Oh, this is what I plan on doing." But I don't want to. I'd rather just show you what I did. It's faster for me that way. So, um here's the new game as it goes. One thing I was thinking is when a new person is playing this game and they're not familiar with how it's laid out, I don't want them to be able to access enemy rooms, these two rooms over here, uh, without first having a weapon. And the weapon is that torch. The way I'm thinking it is maybe you're like, I don't know, a black cat in a corn maze or something, and you're killing evil scarecrows. Why doesn't the camera move anymore? Okay, the camera doesn't move anymore. That's spectacular. Right, I was adding on the rigid body. Player still has their rigid body. I don't think the player needs a rigid body anymore. Okay. All right, I might have to undo some changes because all right, so this is why we recommend using Git and like doing pushes every once in a while because sometimes you might start to make a change and then you have to show people what you've done and you don't have a working version. So when they say, "Hey, back up your project," this is why. So I'm just going to real quick undo everything that I did and I'm going to piece back together the player script. The way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to start here. I'm going to paste. Does that save? Lovely. And now I'm going to... This doesn't have any scripts on it. And this is going to get the old script, which is this one. What's the error? Type or namespace. On this line? No, on line 210. Oh, maybe I added an extra one of those. Spectacular! Okay, and that's an old script that we don't care about anymore. Please let this work. Thank God. Okay, so one thing that the player has now is health points. Ooh. That means that if a player runs into this spiky thing here, they lose all their health points and respawn. You might have noticed the player respawned right here at the door where they entered. It took a long time for me to figure out how to do that, and I'm really proud of that. Um, but yeah, the player will now always respawn back at the door where they entered. Because that's one thing that I hated when playing Zelda 1 is that no matter where you died, you always went back to the very beginning. And that took forever. That's too slow. That is also going to be 5 now. Okay, so everything is still pretty much the same. Can't get that. It displays Sneck. The torch is still here. Fun! The torch doesn't work anymore, which is spectacular. However, we don't need the torch. I haven't figured out how to make the torch work anymore, but the player now starts with a key for testing purposes. And now when I enter a room, two random copies of an enemy spawn in. They have different speeds. They travel at different speeds. Which you might be able to see if I like stand over here. You see that the one that is on the right is moving faster. That is intentional. And when I hit them, ooh, I lose health points and then I die. But because I'm locked in this room, I can't escape. That's why I need to make the weapon work, but we haven't made the weapon work. I'm just going to show you guys how to get to where I am, which is messing with the respawn points and making the enemy room prefab. Because the enemy room is a prefab. And if I, real quick, take the player, the camera, and move it up, and I try not to touch the torch, then I can show you I have another enemy room, but maybe you don't want the player to always get locked in a room. This one just spawns a random copy of an enemy, but they're not locked in the room. That door is just another key door. And you can see the player can like run around and then leave, and it actually deletes that copy of the enemy when you leave. I felt very clever when I figured out how to do that. So let me show you how to do what I did and make it look effortless. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop open the version of the tutorial that I had previously. And feel free to ask questions at any point about what I'm doing. But you understand what I'm going for here, right? Okay, I can also show you what I wanted the player to do while Unity is loading. You can see that this is sort of like this funky polygon. I use a Polygon Collider, and that is going to be like the range. Currently it's messed up, so I need to fix that. But this is like a separate entity. So if you hit the weapon, that like if you hit the player with your if you hit an enemy with your actual self, that's going to make you take damage. But if you hit it with the weapon while the weapon is active, like while the collider is active, then it's going to um, do damage to the enemy. And this collider is only going to be active when you press the button, and it's a separate thing, so I can tag it differently, so that way it all works. Yes, that's what's causing all the errors, is I'm trying to figure out how to make it rotate. And every time that I try to make it rotate, it freaks out. I actually got it to work. It's just I couldn't make the torch move with the player. So that's why I tried to do it where they're both children of the same thing, and that thing is the thing that moves around, but the player does all the collisions for the player. And that's what was causing a whole bunch of errors, and I'm going to have it fixed. However, we have this open now. This is where we left off. You can see nowhere near quite the same level of detail, but we'll get there. Let's get started. First thing I want to do is I want to, in order to tell the player to respawn, we're going to need to define a spawn point. And in order to make the player be able to respawn near the edge of the camera, first thing we're going to have, I'll just display this with this, is we'll call this respawn. And one of the default tags in Unity is respawn, so I'm going to tag it appropriately. And now we're going to go into our top-down player movement script. the version that you guys saw. Oh, it's all fully commented. That's so cute. I'm gonna make. No. Oh, yeah. Okay. We're gonna make a game object. Call it respawn point. No, I don't want to. Do I? What do I do here? We need to tell the player where it's going to need to respawn. And in order to do that, we're going to need to tell it where an object is that we want to go, or we have to tell it the exact coordinates. And I feel like it's a lot easier to say, hey, go to the thing that is currently tagged as a respawn point, and have that be where you respawn. So, where did I do that? Okay, here, where it's gonna mess with that. So we're gonna make another int HP. It's gonna equal 3 by default. So you have 3 hits or you die. Okay. And if HP is less than or equal to 0, so if you died, then relative position is going to be that. I'm going to set target position equal to. All right, and this is going to be a little bit funky, so follow with me. You know what? I'll just pull it up here so that way I can copy paste it and describe what it does instead of typing it out. That sounds like a much more cleverer solution. So I'm going to open up this one. I'm going to try not to get confused because they're named the same. Nope, not that one. This one. Lovely. Okay, so here in fixed update, so it's not there in update. Right, because Unity has this lovely little function or method you can call Gameobject.Find with tag. So this will search every single item in the game that has this tag. And if it doesn't have the tag, it'll ignore it. So this is kind of a. You don't want to call this every single frame, so I'm going to put it in fixed update. Basically, what this is going to do is it's going to look and it's going to find an item with this tag. So you don't want to do this if you have like 300 objects all with this tag, because it's going to give you a pretty much random one. It's not going to be the closest one. It's not going to be any of them, but I'm only going to ever have one thing tagged as respawn at a time. So we don't need to worry about that. It's only looking for a needle in a haystack, as opposed to hundreds of needles still in a haystack. So I'm going to put this here, and this goes right at the beginning. So just if HP is greater than or equal to 0, no. If we have health, it's going to do this. So this is going to be an else. I'm going to remember to close our thing. Yeah. All right. So if we don't have health, if we died, we're going to stop the player from being able to move for a second, so that way we can figure everything out. We're going to set the player's position, so transform.position, equal to find the game object that is the respawn point, find their position, and that's our position. We're going to reset the health. I cannot stress this enough. You must reset the health, or you will be stuck in a death loop. And generally, it's confusing to figure out what's going on when you're in a death loop. because at the stage of the game where we are, where there's not a whole lot of like prettiness going on, and then we're gonna reset player movement. So that is fine and dandy. Anything else that we need to do with this? We need to make sure that there is something set as a respawn point. Currently, that is that. We also need something that can hurt the player. Which brings me to enemy script. Lovely. All right. So we're going to make... I wonder if I can do this. I'm going to take this enemy prefab from one game, and I'm going to try to put it into another. That worked. Spectacular. Okay. So this enemy prefab, we'll drag him in so you can see him. What I did first was I made an empty game object, and I gave it a rigid body and a box collider, and that was it. And I centered it, and then I made 3 little diamonds. They're just for show, and I gave them little feet just for show. There's no colliders on any of that. The only thing that matters is this box. You can see that his hitbox is a little bit wonky. You can fix that on your own time if you want. I don't really care. At this stage, because I'm going to replace that with a nicer sprite. But you can see that it's got a little collider and it's got a rigid body. Everything is pretty much the same as the player. The enemy is pretty much going to function like the player, except it's going to have less complicated collisions. Following? Spectacular. Alright, so the player has a couple... the enemy has a couple of different things that I'm going to give him. Yeah, enemy doesn't currently have the script. That is one thing that will happen if you try to copy a prefab over and it has a script on it, is you gotta make sure you have the exact script that it's looking for, otherwise you'll get a little error like that. And Unity will make a huge stink about that. So, you give it the script, and we're gonna open that script up. First thing that we're gonna want to do is we want these. First one is an int. It's damage. So I'm trying to make this as generic as possible. The idea being that I can use this to make a whole bunch of different kinds of enemies, all while using the same, like, basic script. Because that's how we try to do things in computer science. We try to find the easiest possible way to get things to work, the simplest possible. So this particular enemy, or by default, an enemy will deal 1 damage. And you saw with like this player speed, we can mess with that. So if I want to have like a big boss enemy that kills you with 1 hit, I could change damage to 3. You see that every enemy also has 5 health. So that's how many hits you need to do on it before it'll die. Which means you also need to program in enemy death, which I haven't done yet. You see the enemy also has speed, so if you want to make a speedy little demon, you can do that. And then I also have a bool called living. I made this script so that way you could have spikes. Not necessarily dead enemies, but like, inanimate enemies. Does that make sense? Alright, so you've got inanimate enemies, and those are not living, so they will have that boolean set to false. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that that was all clear. Not dead enemies. We also need these vector 2s. These are just copied from the player movement script, because the player and the enemy move in the exact same way. Except, the enemy only has 1 target position, and that is you. So the target position is always just going to search every single object in the game, and if it's the player, we're going to get that player. So it's the same as the player movement script, except hunting you. I'm going to pop that in. Lovely. And then this is pretty much the same thing as the player movement script, except instead of can move, it's if it's living. So if it is a stationary enemy, it's not gonna move. Um, so that's what living does. I don't want my spikes chasing me. Um, Personally, that's what I don't want. I suppose that could be kind of creepy though if you had like a whole row of spikes and most of them are living. Most of them are inanimate, but one of them's living and it starts chasing you. Uh, and then I have these two things. These are public methods. One of them is called Begone, and one of them is called Get Hurt. These are super important. These are getter methods. So if you guys are familiar with computer science, these are, well, Begone is a destructor. So you call this method and it deletes this object. So the way that I have the enemies work in this game is you have a room, and the room is another object that's placed in the room, and it'll spawn a certain number of enemies. And if you leave the room, like it's not a locked room, I don't want the enemies chasing you off that screen. So it destroys enemies when you leave the screen. In order to do that, we need this destructor. And then I have this, which is just a getter, and this tells the player, when it collides with it, how much it hurt. Right on. So, with that done, now I'm going to go and make sure that this enemy has everything good. That is a living enemy, and okay. Okay. Lovely. By default, it's not living. Okay, and that is a spike pit. So those spike pits that you saw are pretty much just yeah. So I'm going to move this spike pit over here, just so that way I don't accidentally hit it when I'm speedrunning later. And right, we got this guy. He's got. I want spikes to kill you instantly. Because I think that's good game design. If you think that there's better game design, make your own game. And then we need to mess with the player movement script and make sure that the player can get hurt. So we have it set to do what we have it know how to respawn. Now we need to make sure that it can get hurt. So the way that it gets hurt is I have enemies tagged as ow. Um because I thought that was funny. Yeah. And I have enemies as a collider, collision 2D instead of a trigger 2D because I don't like the idea that you can face your enemies. So, ow. And when you collide with an enemy, HP minus equals, so it's going to subtract other game object, get the script, run the hurt, use this get method from that other script. And then it also prints out what your new health is. I believe that's everything that we need in order to die. Let's test that. We've got a respawn that's tagged respawn. Huh? I think that's an old error. It is. Lovely. Okay. Well, we died. That's good. Okay, you see how this is weird? I don't like that it's weird. It was actually behind the camera, and that's why you need to check all of your empties and make sure that they're centered properly. Because that respawn was um if our camera is here, the respawn was back here, so it wasn't visible from the camera. I spent a solid like 10 minutes trying to figure out why I couldn't see player after it respawned, and that was because it was respawning behind the camera. Uh, let's try that again. So, I run into the spike pit. Spike pit can move. I thought I made it not living. I did make it not living. I'll set its speed to 0 just to make sure it doesn't move. It's because of its rigid body. Okay. Maybe it doesn't need a rigid body. No. Yes. Let's try this. Lovely. So now we can die. And we can respawn. And it is 30 minutes. Would you rather I continue going or leave it here? It might become 4 parts, honestly. I did a lot of prep for this meeting and then realized that I only have 30-minute meetings. It is many parts. That's what I'm concerned about, is because the more that I give for these tutorials, the harder it becomes to make a satisfactory game for the competition. So currently, what I have is like the bare minimum, just there's an enemy that can die, there's a respawn point. And if I continue going further, of like, here's how to move the respawn point to like change the rooms that you're in, then you have to figure out how to do even more cool stuff. So, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I might put out a poll or something to see if the people doing the competition want me to go further. Is uh, I'd hate to then raise the bar too high, but also then that means I'm just like expecting better quality games, and I'd rather play better quality games. I'm gonna end the recording here.